2010 was a huge year in the WWE, for better or for worse depending on who you talk to. Although one thing is pretty unanimous, Smackdown vs. Raw 2011 was one of the most complete wrestling games fans have been treated to at the time of its release, and still stacks up today as one of the best, if not the best, games in the Smackdown vs. Raw title series. On release, this game came loaded with a roster of 65 playable wrestlers, not including a handful of managers and even a fictional character. If you add in the DLC, this game comes correct with 78 total characters. With the real-life WWE roster beginning to see serious turnover as we transitioned into a new era, this game had the unique opportunity to usher in the future stars while still featuring the big names we grew up with that were soon to leave the WWE. The WWE lost a bunch of talent this year like Chris Jericho, Batista, Shawn Michaels, Mickie James, and Shelton Benjamin, just to name a few. With DLC well into the mix by 2010, we're going to highlight 5 potential wrestlers that, with their inclusion, could have made this game perfect. Number 1. Wade Barrett and the entirety of Nexus. Considering Wade Barrett and fellow Nexus members David Otunga and Justin Gabriel were made available as downloadable content, they are technically in this game. However, 2010 was dominated by the Nexus faction and Wade Barrett's huge push and feud with John Cena. Barrett was set for superstardom from the moment he made his on-screen debut in February of 2010, which merits recognition beyond a DLC pack. Barrett was intended to be the standout superstar from the infamous and inaugural season of NXT, as evidenced by his competition victory. While that didn't pan out in the grand scheme of things, there's no question Barrett's potential was expected to be reached within a short time following his arrival to the main roster. Barrett was quickly established as the leader of the chaotic group and was instantly thrust into the main event scene and world title picture. With the expected push to stardom paired with his presence on television beginning earlier in the year, the claim can be made that at least Wade Barrett should have been included in the game on release, if not the entire Nexus faction itself. This faction had been dominating weekly programming and claiming the main event spotlight and the attention of the WWE Universe as early as the Fatal 4-Way pay-per-view in June. Barrett would make his singles debut on the main roster shortly after, defeating Mark Henry clean. While in hindsight, this faction was squandered away and buried undeservedly, there was still plenty of momentum during production of Smackdown vs. Raw 2011 to feature this faction as part of the base game. I mean, by the time the game came out, Barrett had a pay-per-view victory over John Cena under his belt. Not to mention, the DLC pack featuring Wade Barrett and the other Nexus stars didn't come out until the holiday season of 2010, meaning there was a considerable delay between getting the game and getting Barrett in your game, which for someone featured as often as he was, is disappointing to say the least. Also worth noting, as previously stated, Wade Barrett, Justin Gabriel, and David Otunga were featured in the Nexus DLC pack as they were considered the top guys in the stable. However, other Nexus members like Heath Slater, Skip Sheffield, Michael Tarver, and Darren Young were not given such an opportunity. Obviously, in the best of circumstances, their potential inclusion certainly could have felt off, considering even games today can't handle presenting a 7-man faction as a single unit. However, I think their inclusions would have been appreciated regardless. Number 2. Daniel Bryan. Daniel Bryan, for multiple reasons, deserves his own spot on this list, separated from Nexus. While Bryan did debut on the main roster with the Nexus stable, due to a brief release from the company, he was subsequently kicked from the group in storyline. Bryan would return at SummerSlam and actually compete against the Nexus, where he was featured as a threat as he was one of the final 2 members of his team and even eliminated 2 of his opponents. Bryan would immediately jump into a feud with The Miz, his former pro during NXT's first season. Bryan would end up defeating the A-lister for the United States Championship just barely over a month after his return. In fact, in true Smackdown vs. Raw fashion, Daniel Bryan was the active United States champion at the time of the game's release, meaning yet another Smackdown vs. Raw game missing an active champion. Daniel Bryan is one of the greatest in-ring technicians of the modern era, so I think it's fair to say maybe his inclusion would have been a little bit more appreciated than the inclusion of John Cena's purple attire, which did make the cut as a DLC inclusion. The American Dragon would continue to represent the mid-card through the end of the year, successfully defending his title at the Hell in the Cell and Survivor Series pay-per-views, and holding on to the championship belt until March of the following year. With the long list of departing talent in 2010, Daniel Bryan would have been a phenomenal choice to include into a DLC pack, not only as a direct opposition to the Nexus stable members that would be featured, but as a future face of the company. Including Daniel Bryan on release would be extremely difficult, much like most of this list, and I acknowledge that. Though according to Brian Williams, one of the developers of the game, in an interview with ESPN's John Robinson, Williams states that Daniel Bryan was originally intended to be a part of the Nexus DLC pack. In fact, his moveset was already motion captured for the game. Due to Bryan's untimely release, Bryan was scrapped in place of Justin Gabriel and was not implemented into future DLC because his character model was never started. Number 3. Alberto Del Rio. While Alberto Del Rio is a controversial figure within the industry, his inclusion here ranks amongst one of the most obvious for this list. Alberto Del Rio was first presented into the WWE Universe in June of 2010, and after nearly 2 months of vignettes and video packages to hype his arrival, Del Rio had finally hit the main roster, debuting for Smackdown on August 20th by defeating legendary Rey Mysterio via submission in the main event of the show. Given the positioning on the card his debut was given, it was not hard to see that WWE had big plans for him. Equipped with bougie vehicles and a personal ring announcer, Del Rio was destined to be a star. While a debut in August is nowhere near enough time for developers to realistically add him to the game by release, I did find it odd that Del Rio was never included in any of the 3 DLC packs that were released for this game. Interestingly enough, Chris Masters would be included in a DLC pack, however Del Rio had actually defeated Chris Masters before the game was released to represent Team Smackdown at the Bragging Rights pay-per-view whilst feuding with Mysterio. This rivalry would carry through Del Rio's appearance in the King of the Ring tournament, as well as the World Heavyweight Championship match at the TLC pay-per-view, which actually advertised the Smackdown vs. Raw game on its posters. I don't know, there's just something that has always bothered me about pay-per-views that advertise the upcoming video games that are headlined with stars that are not in said game. Del Rio's rise to stardom would continue, as he would win the 2011 Royal Rumble where he outlasted 39 other superstars, opposed to the usual 29. Despite this piece of history being unique to Del Rio, he would fail at WrestleMania 27 when competing for the World Heavyweight Championship against Edge. Del Rio would eventually win the WWE Championship later on in 2011. And like so many games in this series already, SmackDown vs. Raw 2011 missed a big opportunity to feature a star who was consistently featured in the WWE product during the time this game was meant to be enjoyed most. Number 4. Serena. The Straight Edge Society would begin its run in the WWE in November of 2009, and would be an extremely memorable phase of CM Punk's first run with the WWE. Beginning with the newly transformed Luke Gallows, CM Punk would continue his recruitment drive through the end of 2009 and into 2010. Come January, a fan was plucked from the audience, introducing Serena. Serena would agree to have her head shaved in order to become one of CM Punk's Straight Edge followers. Serena would act mainly as a valet for the Straight Edge Society through most of the year. This will likely be the only time you'll hear me make a case for someone who had only one televised match during their time with the WWE, but Serena's inclusion in SmackDown vs. Raw 2011 would have been huge. While the Straight Edge Society was around for nearly an entire year by the time the game had released, I couldn't help but feel like something was missing every time I'd see Punk and Gallows enter the ring when playing this game. Serena was no longer contracted by the WWE when the game came out, but that hasn't stopped many superstars from being featured before. She was undefeated in her only in-ring action, which saw her pin Kelly in a mixed tag team match, but was out of the WWE before September. I totally get why she wasn't included, however it is tough to say she wouldn't have had her place in the game, especially considering Hornswoggle and Paul Bearer are featured as managers. Number 5. The Hurricane. This is an interesting case, and not the first time we've discussed the Hurricane in one of these videos. And in all honesty, there are not a ton of holes in this game's roster. Developers did a pretty solid job of including the relevant talent into the game to give the player the best experience possible. However, one thing that I, as well as many other fans, are totally perplexed about is the Hurricane, and you may know what I'm talking about. Hurricane Helms makes an appearance within the Road to WrestleMania mode, and is even selectable as an NPC within Create a Story mode, meaning you can include him in custom cutscenes, and they've got an entire character model made for him, which looks fantastic I might add, but he is unavailable to use as a wrestler in any part of this game. I can't tell you how unfortunate it is to have to look at this guy within all of these cutscenes, knowing that the hope of including him into my universe mode is a dead one. Like I said, 2010 was a huge year of transition for the WWE. We said goodbye to longtime stars and big names that were active through the Ruthless Aggression era like Matt Hardy, Gregory Helms, Carlito, The Great Khali, and more. So many new superstars made their debut, and in SmackDown vs. Raw 2011, we may have been given our last game to truly appreciate what the Ruthless Aggression era offered to us. There's no doubt that this was a phenomenal game, but I believe if the roster was just a bit bigger, this game could have been perfect. Let me know in the comments if you agree with this list, or tell me what changes you'd make. Don't forget to check out the videos where we cover the earlier rosters in the SmackDown vs. Raw series, but that's all I've got for you here. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take it easy.